coming up.
In 2018, two professional foresters wrote to the previous environmental minister saying this is not a matter of if, but when the town of Jasper will burn. Your government didn't even respond.
You've talked about the great job that your government's done, that Jasper is the most prepared town for a fire, and yet 1/3 of the town was allowed to burn down. Nearly $1 billion worth of damage. 2,000 people are homeless. Do you have any humility, Minister?
It comes from the top, Minister. The tone comes from the top.
Hey, please,
the tone comes from the top, Minister. I know very well how it works, Minister, because while you were planning your next escapade to jump off of the CN Tower
Point of order, Mr.
trespass
Chair.
on the Premier's house.
This guy's garage. Like and subscribe.
Last week, I brought forth a unanimous consent motion to expedite Bill C-76, and I want to thank all parties and members for their support. In the evening of July 22nd of this year, a lightning storm sparked 4 wildfires near the Jasper town site. By 10 p.m., an evacuation order had been issued for Jasper National Park. As the municipality of Jasper works to recover and rebuild, adoption of Bill C-76 will continue to ensure our government is supporting Jasperites. With the current streamlining work being done, and by implementing the right legislative authorities, local knowledge and local skills will be the leaders in addressing the needs of reconstruction in their community. Thank you. Merci. Heureux de prendre vos questions maintenant.
I will now be happy to take your questions. Thank you, Minister.
Minister, this meeting is about the events that led to the fire. With nearly $1 billion in damage, 1/3 of Jasper destroyed, 800 housing units gone, leaving 2,000 residents homeless out of a population of 5,000. Businesses reduced to ashes, upending lives and livelihoods. Yes or no, does the government accept responsibility for the failure to protect the people and the town of Jasper?
Merci pour la question. Peut-être que pour vous donner une idée de...
Thank you for that question. Perhaps I could give you a sense of what has been done over recent years. If you could look at the funding invested since the time when Stephen Harper was in power, $2 million were invested in 2014-2015 to prevent wildfires. Just to prevent forest fires in 2022-2023, it was $4.4 million. So this is double than what was spent under the previous government. But we did not stop there. Since 2020, $6.9 million were invested.
Okay.
No, that's not, we don't operate that way. So,
Go ahead.
well, I know some committees do that, but we're a little more freewheeling. Makes it
well, if it's
makes for a better
freewheeling,
debate. But anyway, go ahead, Minister.
Deux informations. Donc,
Two pieces of information to provide: $6.9 million just to address infestations and remove dead wood since 2020, and $79 million since 2023. So we have invested at a rate almost triple that of the previous government.
You know, you have been quoted by saying years of preparation and forest management paid off. Yet a third of the town is gone. You know, $1 billion in devastation. 2,000 people are now homeless. So you're telling me this preparation is paying off. Minister, if this is an example of preparation and success, what does failure look like?
en fait, si on n'avait pas fait tout ce travail-là et quand...
Well, if we hadn't put in all of these efforts, and when I say we, this is Parks Canada, the City of Jasper, the Government of Alberta, and Indigenous peoples, if all of this work had not been done in order to create a protective zone around the city, the impacts would have been far worse. You must understand, Jasper is one of the cities best equipped to deal with something like this. I know the Conservative Party has an issue with this, but we are facing climate impacts like we have never dealt with before. Floods, tropical storms, and yes, fires. The chair will tell me when it's time for me to stop speaking.
Saying this Fire Smart is a national program inspired by Jasper, and this is what you've said, and I quote, "What we do around the country to protect the towns and cities was inspired largely by what we've been doing in Jasper." So I have to ask, if Jasper is the model for towns in proximity to forests, should we expect that a third of a town that is burnt to the ground? Is this the new national standard where only a third of a town burns and you consider this success? Is that your new plan?
Ce que Alors, effectivement, le programme Fire Smart est un programme.
Yes, the Fire Smart is a program used by municipalities throughout the country. What needs to be done is acknowledge the fact that we are dealing with natural disasters that we've never dealt with before. Take atmospheric rivers, for example, in the West Coast, heat waves, floods on the East Coast, and there will be others. We do need to do more to protect ourselves. I agree with you, with the member on that. Towns and cities located near fires may be affected by forest fires, but the Fire Smart program is used throughout the country, and it is something that we will continue to work on.
Your government first warned about the reality of a catastrophic fire in Jasper.
Peut-être que je peux tourner là. Maybe Landon, you were there on the ground. I could turn to you in terms of the sequence of event that led.
Of when Jasper will burn. Not if it could burn, because you knew that there was a lot of fuel and everything, that the high potential of fires. When did you guys know this?
Avec vous, là, je vous ai démontré que notre gouvernement.
I have demonstrated to you already that what our government has done. Your government invested $2 million. Our government invested almost $80 million to prevent forest fires. $2 million, $80 million. That's the difference between you and us. And I understand that more needs to be done. I understand that. I'm the first to acknowledge that. When a notification went out, my team acted.
Yellowhead, Jim Iglinski brought forward on the floor of the House of Commons in 2017 to the Environment Minister then, said they take this serious issue very seriously. Then in 2018, Jasper Parks Superintendent said Parks Canada takes this issue very seriously. Once again, nothing done. In 2018, two professional foresters wrote to the previous environmental minister saying this is not a matter of if, but when the town of Jasper will burn. Your government didn't even respond. Time and time again, you say you take this very seriously, how forests are going to be protected and towns are going to be protected, but yet no action. Does the government accept responsibility for the failure to protect the people in the town of Jasper? Yes or no?
Une très brève réponse, s'il vous plaît, monsieur.
With a brief answer, Minister. We invested about 40 times as much as this Harper government in order to prevent forest fires in Jasper.
There was a lot of confusion about who was in charge, what was happening. There was a lot of blame going around. You know, Daniel Smith and the UCP were very clearly blaming the federal government. There was blame going both ways. And for Albertans, we didn't really have a clear view on what was happening, why it was happening the way that it was, and if everything had been done properly. You know, I'm aware that Premier Daniel Smith has cut the wildfire management budget by $30 million. I am aware that the NDP, that my colleague Richard Cannings has been asking for some time to have a national wildfire force. I guess from my perspective, Minister, what do you say to the people of Alberta who watched us lose a third of our cherished Jasper town site, and think about places like Lake Louise, think about places like Banff, think about other national parks? How do we know that the challenges that we saw in Jasper aren't going to be repeated in future in other beloved cities in our province or other beloved towns?
So, I mean, I was talking to the mayor of Jasper. I've been talking to him on a regular basis, but I was talking to him the day before. And at that point, the fire, it was some that had started, but it was under control. We thought, most people thought that we could manage it. And then winds started picking up. Like we went from winds that were about 30 kilometers an hour to winds that went between 120 and 150 kilometers an hour. I believe in the conditions change very, very rapidly. You talked about lives being impacted in Jasper. Mr. Shepherd, how many Parks Canada, or maybe Andrew, how many Parks Canada employees live in Jasper? How many of them have been affected?
Yeah, so we have 500 employees that live in Jasper and their families, and 200 have lost their homes.
So we care.
And accommodations. So
we care deeply. I mean, and they care deeply. We care deeply about what happens. I talked about, a buffer zone of 1,700 hectares that have been has been created over the years around Jasper. I believe around Banff it's around 2,000 hectares. Because of climate change, we will have to reevaluate those and probably create larger buffer zones.
And the National Firefighting Force, perhaps.
You've heard the Prime Minister said that, we have Parks Canada, that is a federal forest fighting force, but could we do more? We've invested a lot since budget last year in more forest fighting capability federally. I spoke about the investment we've done specifically around Jasper in the last few years, north of close to $90 million.
Sorry, I do know that you've already given us some of those numbers, and so I don't want to make you repeat yourself. And I guess from people that are living in Alberta, what we're thinking is that is this going to be sufficient, considering that climate change means these are going to happen more and more regular, and are we going to be able to respond to them as fast as we need to? And I think most people would say that the budget happened in the spring, the forest fire happened in the summer, and it didn't seem to help the people of Jasper. So I would just reiterate that for you as well. One other question I just really quickly wanted to, just one second.
To climate change.
And I understand that. I'm not saying that we aren't going to have forest fires, but I do think that the response to those forest fires has to be stronger, to be honest. And I do think that the collaboration between the provincial government and the federal government was wanting, and those looking in saw confusion and fights. Whether that was just on the news is one thing, but that's what Albertans saw.
It's one thing for what Premier Smith said. If you talk to the forest fighters who were on the ground, there was, whether you're a Jasper forest fire, whether you're with the Alberta government, whether you're with Parks Canada, they work like that. Mr. Shepherd, you could talk about that. But
the communications was not strong for those in Alberta. It was a very difficult time for many of us. One really quick question I want to get in before my time runs out. One of the challenges that we have is Jasper is a tourism city, of course. There's a lot of people who make their living off tourism. We know that for many of them, they were not able to have sufficient hours to access the EI system. This is a real challenge for workers that were, that by no fault of their own are no longer able to work. I've written with my colleague Blake Desjardins, we've written to your government, we've not received a response. Is there any chance, or is there any attempt being made to ensure that those people who have been affected by the fire in Jasper will be able to access EI because they didn't?
Very, very briefly, because we're at 6 minutes. I'll do maybe 10, 15 seconds. Maybe we can answer that in another round.
I'm the Minister of Environment and Climate Change. I will certainly raise your point with Minister Boissonnault, who's responsible for
Thank you. Okay,
EI.
We'll go to our second round, the 5-minute round, and it's Mr. Lloyd who's leading it off.
Mr. Chair, thank you, Minister, for coming here. And I think the only thing I can agree with you on here is that there were brave and heroic firefighters that were fighting on the front lines. And once this fire started, I don't believe there was anything they could have done to have stopped it because of just the intensity of this fire. But you've come in here, Minister, with quite a lot of bravado. You've talked about the great job that your government's done, that Jasper is the most prepared town for a fire, and yet 1/3 of the town was allowed to burn down. Nearly $1 billion worth of damage. 2,000 people are homeless. Do you have any humility, Minister? Is there any admission that your government could have done more to prevent this fire from destroying 1/3 of the town? What could you have done, Minister?
It's quite ironic that your party, of all parties, would be talking about that when you oppose systematically every measure we put in place to fight climate change,
you
or
didn't
even
take
to
action.
adapt,
Just a
for
second.
nine
to
years.
adapt to climate
Mr.
change.
Lloyd. We're not in question period here.
You oppose
Could we just
everything.
stop a second?
Yes.
Stop a second. Just pause for a second. Let's just calm down and have a meaningful exchange. So, where were we at? Were you at your answer or your question? I'm sorry. I was talking to Mr. Morris.
I'm here to listen to the Minister right now.
Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
I find it incredibly ironic that your party, of all the parties in the House of Commons, would be asking these questions when you oppose both measures to fight climate change and measures to adapt to climate change. Climate change is a reality. You may dispute
your
this.
Measures
your party may
fail
not
to protect the town of
recognize
Jasper.
this, but it's real, and we won't prevent.
And you are not showing any humility. You're not giving Canadians any solace.
This is not
We
about
won't prevent
humility and
forest fires.
modesty, and we're not going to get into.
I'd like to move on to my next question.
Yeah, please do. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Minister, in 2017 and in 2018, in multiple letters sent to your predecessor, Catherine McKenna, Minister at the time, Ken Hodges and Emil Begin, who are forestry scientists warned your government that Parks Canada was not capable of preventing this fire, that the actions that they had taken to date were not capable of preventing these forest fires. They said it was a matter of when, not if. Why did Parks Canada fail to take the actions necessary to prevent this devastating wildfire?
I respectfully disagree with the characterization of your question. Andrew, I'm wondering if you want to talk about, I've spoken about some of the things that Parks has done. Maybe you want to add a few things?
Yeah, so through the Canadian Interagency Forest Fire Council, of course, Parks Canada gets a lot of support and uses a cross-Canada, government-wide, federal, provincial standard of how forest fires are fought, what the information that goes into that.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I'm going to have to cut this off.
Well, why?
It's going quite slowly.
Okay, well, go ahead with your next question. It's your time.
In 2018, Minister, your own Superintendent of Parks, Alan Fair, went on CBC and said, quote, fire is not something that we're actually concerned about. He claims that your department did its homework to protect Jasper. Do you stand by the words of your superintendent? Was fire not a concern in Jasper National Park? Did you do your homework? Yes or no?
Since that interview, $86 million wasn't...
$6 million.
$86 million.
For Jasper National Park?
Yes. Oh, some of it for Jasper, some of it for the other national parks
all across the country.
Alberta.
Mr. Lloyd, excuse me, I'm going to stop the time.
Compared to the $2 million...
Excuse me. I like robust debate myself personally, and I have no problem with that, but please let the minister answer the question, so that we can find out the truth or an approximation of it. Go ahead.
So since that interview was done, $86 million was invested compared to $2 million when you were in power. $2 million, $86 million.
That's false, Minister. But I will go on. In 2020, your government announced $6.9 million over 3 years for Jasper National Park. The Alberta Forest Products Association, in an open letter in 2017, said it would take $85 million to protect the park. And yet your government only invested $6.9 million over 3 years. The proof is in the pudding. A third of the town of Jasper burned down, and you're here to this committee bragging about a $6 million investment? It's not nearly enough, Minister.
En fait, vous faites erreur, c'est 6.9.
You are wrong. It was $6.9 million for pine beetle infestation, but it was $79 million total. So it's wrong to say it was just $6 million. We added $79 million after that.
Why was thousands of hectares of dead pine beetle infested trees allowed to be in close proximity to the town of Jasper? Thousands of hectares. Your government says that you've removed 1,700 hectares since 2014. Well, in a 2022 report, your own department said that they only removed 1.6 hectares of white park pine. Like, there are thousands of hectares of dead pine beetle trees in the vicinity of Jasper. Why were these allowed to stay there when they represented a serious threat to the town? All these experts knew it. Why didn't you remove them?
Good question.
So through the 1,700 hectares that were removed, so, about 17 square kilometers, which is about 8 times the size of the town of Jasper, just to put it in perspective for people.
In a 1 million square hectare park.
Correct, but with a lot of that park not being the town. We can all agree to that, I'm sure. So within that, you had a large buffer zone and a buffer zone, and on top of that, and Landon is the vegetation and fire specialist out of Banff.
How much
on top of that, we have a whole series of ramp types of there's a large, and I don't want to just call it a sprinkler system, but a high-powered sprinkler system that protects the town, that goes up, 12 meters in height, that protects a large area of the town.
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to cut it off here. We're way over time. We're way over time. But anyway, it's very complex, I know.
Thank you for your professionalism, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Longfield.
I've heard in the House, the increased cost on pollution that we're putting in place to try to bend the curve on climate change didn't stop the forest fires. Could you talk about the governance that we're putting in place, the trajectory that we're trying to change, and how we're working with firefighters, with national parks, with provincial counterparts, municipal counterparts. It's hard to paint that picture in a few minutes, but if you could start on that, then I'd like to just go over to Mr. Shepherd about some of the operational details.
There are some in the House of Commons, one party, the Conservative Party, think that there's an on-off switch for climate change somewhere on a wall somewhere, or some fairy dust we can sprinkle on this. There used to be a time when the Conservative Party of Canada believed that hard things were hard. And that, for example, Prime Minister Brian Mulroney helped the world agree to the Montreal Protocol on ozone depletion in 1987. Yeah. And scientists estimate that by 2070, 2080, the ozone layer should have recovered from decades of abuse. So it will have taken not quite a century, but almost a century. And fighting climate change is not something that's going to be stopped overnight. It's going to take years and years of hard work, something that they're incapable of even understanding. But that's what we're doing. And that's why we're deploying all those measures. And yes, the emissions are at their lowest level in 25 years. We've never seen greenhouse gas emissions in Canada go down unless it was because of a financial crisis, economic recession, or COVID. But now they're going down. They're 8% below the 2005 levels, and they will continue going down. Maybe, I don't want to take too much time, and maybe I can pass it over to you, Mr. Shepherd, to talk about some of the interagency cooperation we have with Alberta, the town of Jasper, and others as well.
And thank you, Mr. Shepherd. I'm watching you listen to our conversation, which we are not here to blame you or your staff, or the work you're doing is incredible. We need to know more details, so as we look forward to what next year looks like and the year after that, what are we learning operationally? How further can we support the work that you're doing on behalf of Canadians?
Well, thanks for the opportunity to speak to that. So at our local kind of regional, provincial, and interprovincial level, we're able to operationally have a very tight cooperative relationship. Sorry to hear that wasn't getting communicated out because it really meant a lot to have the support from British Columbia and Alberta, just like we supported them in some of their really hard years in 2021 in BC and last year in the Northwest Territories and Alberta, and again this year in Alberta. And we're going to have to keep doing that, and it is functioning and working.
We know that the government of Alberta has failed to support the firefighting initiatives in our province. They've also failed to spend the money on cleaning up wells. They've also failed to protect the mountains from coal mining. What's the federal government's role when the provincial government fails to do anything possible to protect the environment in one of the provinces of this country?
We're doing a lot. In fact, I don't think you could find a time in our history when so many different measures have been deployed to protect the environment, to fight for climate change, to increase conservation in this country.
Certainly lots of announcements. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll go now to Mr. Calkins. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you very much, Chair. Minister, you were asked earlier a very specific question by my colleague, Mr. Soroka, about when you were first briefed. When were you briefed about the gravity of the situation of the potential for a catastrophic fire in Jasper National Park, including the Jasper town site? When? I want a date, Minister. This is something that would stick in the memory of somebody if you were about to lose, a heritage site park. You would know when you had that conversation. When were you briefed?
En fait, j'ai commencé à recevoir.
I started receiving briefing notes, and again, as I noted, I spoke to the mayor of Jasper even before the situation deteriorated. I don't have the dates before me, but I can certainly provide them. I don't have my day planner with me, but I did have conversations with Parks Canada representatives even before people were evacuated, as I noted.
After you with the mayor and after you had those conversations, did you direct your staff at Parks Canada to accelerate their fire preparedness for Jasper? Yes or no?
Vous savez, je ne sais pas comment vous envisagez le travail de...
I don't know how you imagine a minister's job works. And I don't know if you'll understand my answer, but it is not the minister's job to micromanage 4,000 Parks Canada employees and tell them how to do their jobs. I'm not a forest fire expert.
It comes from the top, Minister. The tone comes from the top.
Hey, please,
The tone comes from the top, Minister. I know very well how it works, Minister, because while you were planning your next escapade to jump off of the CN Tower
Point of order, Mr.
trespass
Chair.
on the Premier's house, I was
Point of order,
actually
Mr.
at
Chair.
Park Park in Jasper
I'm
National Park.
stopping the time.
I was there on the
I'm
ground.
stopping
order,
the time.
Mr.
This is
Chair.
not- I'm stopping the time. I mean, this is going south.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Mr. Vancouver.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Conservatives do not own outrage and anger at what happened this summer. And for the Conservatives to come here and berate the minister
Yeah, I don't
in
wanna
this
get into-
fashion
yeah.
is disrespectful,
No,
particularly,
no,
if I could finish, particularly because we have Mr. Shepherd here.
Mr. Vancouver, I don't care what the debate is, who's saying what really. I just want to keep it, civil and
Respectful,
respectful
on topic.
Well, yes, but we sometimes go off topic, but I just, if the minister's asked the question, I would like him to have the chance to respond and succinctly, and I found the tone was getting a little too aggressive, Mr. Calkins, to be honest with you. But anyway, well, let's start again. Well, we could debate that till the cows come home, I'm sure. But let's start over. We're not going to start over. We're going to resume the clock, and we'll see how it goes. Okay.
There's no indication, Minister, that Parks Canada has changed or significantly changed its fire preparedness policy in any way, shape, or form with the matter of prescribed burns in order for fire prevention. When I was a warden in Jasper, and that's what I did in the 90s when I worked for Alberta Parks and National Parks Canada, I could see what was happening with the parks policy. I could see the removal of the roads for fire suppression, and the policy has shifted, and it hasn't changed one bit. The pine beetle comes along, it changes the entire landscape. You have the ability, Minister, to change the policy, set the direction, and set the tone. You had the Excelsior fire in 2015. Residents were worried. They came together. Experts from BC came. All the work that was done in collaboration with the government of Alberta. Everybody said they weren't ready. The fire chief in Jasper National Park was asking for more trailers for sprinklers. They were asking to update the water systems. They were asking the residents, 200 of them came to a town hall in the fire hall, asking to remove that deadfall. You claim that you've spent millions and millions of dollars and you've only removed a couple of hectares of this stuff. This is dead standing pine. It's the driest, most easily burnable, hot burning wood that there is. And you've done nothing. There is nothing here. But I do have this. I have from Jonah Mitchell a response to Melanie Kwong at Parks Canada that says, at what point do we make the organizational decision to cancel planned prescribed burns in Western Canada as more and more media articles raise public concern? Public and political perception may become more important than actual prescription windows. This is what your organization is doing, and you're not giving them the direction, and that lies with you, Minister. You're responsible for that. When are you going to take responsibility for the $1 billion of damage that happened in Jasper? Everybody knew this was coming. Everybody knew it, and you were told. And yet here we are, $1 billion worth of assets burned down, and our beautiful Jasper National Park, where I used to work, is laying in ruins.
Why don't we give the minister a chance to provide some answers?
Il y a beaucoup de choses qui ont changé depuis.
One, lots has changed since you worked at Parks Canada. You spoke about the 1980s. A great deal was done since the 80s. You spoke about a sprinkler system, and my colleague spoke about the investments that led to this system. You spoke about wood that needed to be removed. We carried out the removal through both prescribed burns and manual removal. I am the first to recognize that we need to do more to protect ourselves against climate change. Unlike the Conservatives, who bury their heads in the ground and say that climate change doesn't exist and has no impact in Canada.
Left, Mr. Calkins.
What have you got to say about this memo? Why are the prescribed burns, and why are your staff talking about canceling fire prescribed burns for the sake of media optics? Has this ever been brought to your attention, Minister?
So yeah, as both those employees work directly for me, I'd love to take this question in the fact that what they were doing was looking at the difference between prescribed burns and mechanical removal. So we're communities. We had just had the mayor of Fort Smith and their council talk to us and say they weren't comfortable with prescribed burns. We just had Banff talk to us that they weren't happy with prescribed burns. We had articles coming out all across the country. So two of my managers, which is, I think, a good thing for people to do, is to look at different options that they have. Two of them were saying, do we do prescribed burns or do we do mechanical removal? It was not that there would be doing nothing. It was the choice between mechanical removal or prescribed burns. You can take things out of context, which they have been, but that was what the conversation was about.
There's been a lot of accusations thrown around, a lot of negativity concerning what happened. But I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the cooperation on the ground and how you and the individuals actually there fighting these fires felt about what had happened, what you were able to do, and the level of preparedness when you came in.
Thank you for the question. Very, very happy to talk about some of the things that did go very well with respect to the Jasper fire. And it started with the safe evacuation of about 20,000 people in a very short period of time. And that was conducted by a community that is only 5,000 residents itself, and we were able to safely get that many people out of harm's way, and it helped us to prepare for being able to manage the fire and protect critical infrastructure and 70% of the town, which my team and I are incredibly proud of being able to pull off with a fire that was, as I said, unprecedented. The problem with that term is that all of the fires that I've been going to in the last 5 years in British Columbia, in the Northwest Territories, in Alberta, are all unprecedented for those areas, and our jobs are getting harder. And I do want to take the opportunity to shout out that I certainly do enjoy working with a lot of different specialists, because I don't approach fire or these levels of events or landscape management with a sense of ego, like I've got everything figured out. And it really is important to rely on other specialists and other experts. I know that some professional foresters were referred to earlier. We actually do go to a lot of professional foresters for assistance with wildfire risk reduction work, and we do collaborate with them. We didn't collaborate with those two individuals who obviously were very interested in offering their services, but we do work with a lot of specialists all the time.